They say rain cleanses, but on some nights when the skies weep and thunder groans, it awakens something else entirely. On these soaked streets and in lonely rooms, shadows stretch longer, footsteps echo louder, and the line between real and unreal blurs into something cold, watching, waiting. Tonight you'll hear the true horrors that unfolded under the cover of pouring rain, and you might never listen to a storm the same way again. It was one of those nights when the rain didn't just fall, it hammered, pouring down in thick sheets that blurred the streetlights and turned every shadow into something untrustworthy, something alive. And if you've ever lived through a storm like that alone, you'll know exactly the type of unease I'm talking about. Not fear exactly, but a steady, creeping pressure that makes your skin feel a size too small. Your thoughts just a bit too loud, and every sound in your home, no matter how familiar, suddenly feels wrong, distorted by the wind, the thunder, and the trickle of doubt that seeps into your mind like water under a door. And that's exactly what it was like for Maya, a 29-year-old school teacher who had just moved into a creaky, oddly cheap rental on the edge of a woodsy neighborhood outside Seattle, trying to restart her life after a breakup so messy it left her deleting social media accounts and switching phone numbers. And maybe that's why she didn't think twice about taking a house that, in retrospect, had a lease that seemed way too eager to get signed, because she just needed to feel gone from everything she used to be. And in the daylight, the place wasn't too battled, sure, and drafty, but with a fireplace, decent kitchen, and the kind of big windows that let you watch the trees sway during heavy weather. But that very feature was what came to haunt her on the third night of a non-stop rainstorm, when some finger Sumian began tapping on the living room glass just past midnight. A soft, inconsistent tapping that echoed faintly through the walls, and sent a shiver straight up her spine, even though the rational part of her brain immediately insisted it was probably just a branch in the wind. Except she had already checked earlier in the day and there was no tree near that window, nothing close enough to tap like that. And when she drew back the curtain that first night to look, there was nothing but darkness and the distorted reflections of her own fearful face staring back at her. The tapping stopped the moment she moved the curtain and then returned 10 minutes later, stronger this time, more intentional, more rhythmic, like fingers. And that was only the beginning, because over the next 3 nights, the tapping got bolder, moving from window to window, sometimes skipping a night, sometimes coming in short bursts that made her jump while brushing her teeth or doing dishes, but always returning just when she started convincing herself it had stopped. And though she never saw anyone outside, she began noticing small things inside the house had changed positions, chair angled differently, a cabinet door left ajar, a muddy footprint in the laundry room she didn't recognize, each one dismissed with rationalization that felt more like pleading than believing. And all the while, the rain kept falling, and the wind howled like the forest was warning her to leave, and her sleep grew restless, twisted with dreams of standing in the middle of her yard, soaked to the bone, staring up at her own house and seeing someone watching her from inside. And one morning she woke to find her bedroom window cracked open, despite swearing she never touched it. The sill damp, a faint smell of wet earth and mildew drifting in, as if something had briefly entered, or exited, and still she stayed, convincing herself it was stress, maybe even trauma manifesting from her old relationship, until the night she found the handwritten note pressed under her front door. No name, just a line scrawled in heavy ink here: "Not alone when it rains." And her stomach dropped so violently she almost threw up, because the note wasn't wet, meaning it had been slid under during one of the rare minutes the rain paused, and whoever wrote it knew her schedule. Knew she often waited until the storm eased up to bring the garbage cans back in, or check the mail. And that night, she barricaded the door and sat on her bed with a kitchen knife and all the lights on, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears, the thunder rolling like distant drums while the wind screamed and the shadows danced across her walls. And then came the moment that finally broke Herat. Exactly 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed with a notification. A single photo message from an unknown number. It was a picture of her sleeping, taken from inside the room, from the foot of her bed. Time-stamped only minutes before she woke up and checked her phone, and she screamed, really screamed, the kind that tears up your throat, and she ran out of the house in nothing but her pajamas, barefoot into the mud. Rain pouring down on her like a punishment as she flagged down a car at random. And the driver, an old man who looked like he hadn't slept in days himself, simply nodded when she cried about someone being inside her house and said, "You're not the first to run out of there in the middle of the rain." And when she asked what he meant, his voice cracked as he muttered, "That house was empty for 7 years before you and the ones before you. They left the same way, middle of a storm, screaming into the night." And he drove her to a 24-hour diner where she sat shivering under a thin blanket, sipping bad coffee, her hands trembling so bad she couldn't even hold the cup steady. And the next day, when the police arrived with her, they found the house empty, no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no muddy shoes, and every window shut tight. But in the kitchen sink was a single wet boot print pointing inward, as if someone had stepped into her world and evaporated. And that wasn't the only rainy night horror I've heard. There's also the story of James, a divorced father of 2 who had to drive through the back roads of Oregon during a storm to deliver medicine to his ex-wife's place after their youngest caught a fever. And somewhere along the winding roads, surrounded by nothing but trees, he spotted a figure by the side of the road, soaked barefoot and waving woe, looked just like his ex's late sister, who had drowned in a flash flood 4 years earlier. And though he slammed on the brakes, his headlights cut out for just a second, and she vanished. And when he got to the house and mentioned it to his ex, she went pale and said their daughter had just claimed Auntie Carla tucked her in 20 minutes ago and whispered that Daddy was almost here. Or the story of Keisha, a college student walking home from a night class in Philly when the rain hit out of nowhere and she took a shortcut through a narrow alley to avoid getting drenched, only to hear her name whispered behind her, clear as day, but no one was to one visible anyway. And by the time she got back to her apartment, her soaked hoodie smelled like pond water and rot, and in the mirror above her bathroom sink, someone had drawn a dripping smiley face with 2 empty eye holes, despite the glass being wiped clean earlier that morning. And you might think all these people are just imagining things, storms messing with their minds, sleep deprivation, stress, but then there's me, and I'll be honest, I never believed in any of this until last fall, when I was stranded at a roadside motel during a thunderstorm and someone knocked on my door at 2 a.m., and when I opened it, there was no one there, or just wet footprints leading away into the parking lot, barefoot and impossibly long, like someone had been standing there for hours, waiting. And I still hear that knock sometimes, on rainy nights. And the worst part is, I don't stay in motels anymore. If this storm sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real horror stories that lurk just beneath the surface. Have a terrifying tale of your own? Drop it in the comments. You never know who else might be reading or watching.